This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 395 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking about cultural deep dives. Firstly, let me pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation where I'm recording this podcast today. So I am always utterly fascinated to learn more and more about a place's culture and heritage and customs, like what's unique about it, how it became that way. I guess what's different to my life and what I might take away from knowing more about it. That's one of the best parts of traveling and getting to know other people in other places. So today I have three guests, each taking us on a deep and very specific dive into different cultural topics, from death and funerals in Bali to the Irish language and some of the social history of Iceland you might not know about. So all kinds of interesting things that I have chatted with people about in recent months. My first guest today is Silvia Gentile Polese. She's originally from Italy, but now based in Indonesia. And Silvia tells us a story from her very first visit to Bali, where she was really immediately taken right into some deep diving parts of the culture with a very meaningful experience.
Basically, the first time I came to Bali a long time ago, I remember booking an accommodation not too far from the airport because, I thought I'm going to be very tired flying from London. I want to be just 20 minutes away from the airport. And 20 minutes actually turned into 4 hours because, Bali traffic, okay, there could be, but there was a special event that day that I don't know what it was still to this day. So I got to the accommodation quite late. I was even more tired. But, the check-in in Bali is always very lovely. People are very warm and they always give you a drink. So I just felt like I was at the right place. I was relaxed and everything. And because I know that when I travel, my muscles get very tight. And I saw online that this homestay had a yoga shala. So I've asked to see the schedule, someone coming from London, city girl, can I see the schedule of the yoga classes for the week? And the receptionist looked at me and she said, well, there are no yoga classes this week and there's no yoga class tomorrow. But there is going to be an amazing funeral tomorrow.
Oh, it's so similar. Yoga, funeral, yeah.
It's going to be amazing. You shouldn't miss it. And the way she was describing it is the way I would describe maybe a pub quiz, It's going to be cool. Come around, And I also don't really love going to funeral in general, so it was very strange. And with all the questions I could have asked, for example, who passed away, that's one of those. All I was thinking was, what should I wear? Because I'm not carrying anything black in my carry-on.
You were prepared maybe for yoga, but not for
Yeah, yoga, absolutely. So I've asked, is there a dress code? And the receptionist said, oh, don't worry about that. I can give you my sarong, which is this fabric you can wrap around your waist and turn into a long gown. And then the owner of this homestay has a wife who's very nice and she can just lend her blouse and belt, whatever. So I went to bed a bit confused. But I was like, okay, I'm going to this funeral, whatever. Anyways, I woke up the day after. It was very hot and it was the rainy season as well in Bali. Ugh. And it was one of these sunny, steamy days. And there I was wearing the sarong, long-sleeved blouse. And the belt was so tight, I felt like a salami, completely. I don't know if I was able to breathe at that point. But anyways, before going to the funeral, we have to prepare the offerings. So these baskets basically made out of palm leaves. And because I'm a beginner, I was allowed to use a stapler.
That's very kind.
Very kind of them. And I thought I've done an amazing job. And I put the flowers inside. And it depends on what you have to use it for. It goes something different on top. And I just put some nice flowers. I was very happy with that. And the receptionist said, it looks good. I'm going to put it in the fridge and we're going to use it tomorrow for another ceremony. which means your offering looks rubbish.
Maybe not rubbish, maybe just not funeral appropriate.
Yeah, maybe not. Anyways, I was a bit upset, but then I thought, okay, let's carry on. Let's go to the funeral now. So we went to the funeral. And it was such a joyful kind of parade on the street. There was a lot of music. Everyone was pretty joyful, wearing bright colors. And then at the front of all this like river of people, there was a big tower carried by 20 or 30 people. And on the top of this like goldeny tower, there was probably the first son of the person who passed away sitting on a coffin. And at that point, I still didn't know who was inside. But we had to go to the front of all of this. But, the Balinese way is that people are not willing to walk anymore. They just want to go on the scooter. And by that point, I've never been on the back of a scooter.
A lot of firsts on this day.
Exactly. And I was jet-lagged. It was all happening. And I couldn't sit normally. I had to sit on the side because I was wearing a long sarong. Other, difficult thing to face on that first day. I felt like it was a bit too much. I was so drawn to just pull up the skirt and sit normally, but I thought I might get arrested today. Let's not do that. So then at the end of all this walk, you end up at the cemetery, which is where the cremation happens. And that was something that I've never witnessed before. And it was a bit hard to watch, but it was beautiful at the same time. And that's when I understood who passed away. Because during the cremation, I met the owner of the homestay. Well, he was wondering who I was because I was the only bule, which means foreigner, to the ceremonies. Then he understood that I was his guest at the homestay. And basically his wife is the yoga teacher. And the wife's dad is the person who passed away. So I was at his funeral.
Hence no yoga classes that week, yes.
Fair enough, yeah. And then after that, after the cremation, normally you go to the beach or the river to release the ashes. But I had a work call, so I had to go back to my room. And also I felt like, I've done enough for today. But after that, I went to, not the same day, obviously, but like until now, I went to many other funerals and they are beautiful, right? And the other things I've learned that day is, everyone was so joyful and wearing beautiful clothes. And deeply, I was thinking, was this person nice? Because no one seems upset, that he passed away.
It's almost too much of a celebration.
Yeah. And actually, the owner of the homestay, I didn't ask that, obviously. I said, it's a very joyful celebration. And I think he probably had similar questions from foreigners in the past because he knew exactly what I meant. And he said, the way we see death is actually very different from Western countries because we think that when someone is ready to pass away, it means that that person has achieved the goal. The soul has achieved the goal of that life and now it's ready to move to the next one. If there's going to be a next one, it could be that it did all the lives it was supposed to do, So we know that there wasn't any better time than now. And because we believe in karma and we know that person was really good, we know that the next life is going to be amazing. And after that, I've then been to other funerals that were amazing. A few months ago, I went to a royal funeral, actually, in Ubud, and it was fantastic. And now I know why they describe funerals that way, because it makes sense. They are incredible. You just never know what's coming next. They're all different.
I really love that Silvia got straight into learning more about the Balinese culture right from that first day. I don't think it's a coincidence. I imagine that the people she met could realise she was open and curious and very keen to involve her then in their funeral. Very interesting stuff. Now, my next guest today is Laura Pakenham. Laura is Irish, and she has taken a deep dive into her own culture by making the Irish language a key part of her career.
It's really interesting because I work in the Irish language media sphere. And I guess the main feedback I would have gotten from people when I kind of launched into this career was, you're kind of living yourself there. You're going to be stuck to Ireland for the foreseeable. That's not really going to take you anywhere. And I was like, do you know what? Fair enough. But if that's the case, that's fine by me as well. I picked this for a reason, obviously very loyal and patriotic. So if it doesn't take me further afield, that's fine. But it is unbelievable to see the space that has been created and kind of cultivated for the Irish language abroad, because we're kind of in this era of a Celtic revival or a Celtic appreciation movement. And the Irish culture and the Irish language are so fitsa-futsa, as we would say in Irish, kind of intertwined with each other. You can't have one without the other. So as people are turning their eyes and ears towards Irish culture, naturally, as a byproduct of that, people are turning their eyes and ears towards the language. And I think the craziest example of this for me was working on a kids show. And this kids show was kind of similar format to like Eurovision, Junior Eurovision. Essentially, I got a call about 2 weeks beforehand and it was like, Laura, would you be free to fly to Georgia in about 2 weeks' time? And I was like, oh, Georgia, America, I can't. Europe, America, Georgia, those kind of lines aren't really aligning for me here. But sure, I'll grab my cowboy hat. That's no problem. Like, count me in.
Wow.
And then I saw the flight details and it was like, stop over in Turkey. I was like, okay, sure, whatever path we need to take. And then final destination to Tbilisi, to Tbilisi. I was like, this is quite interesting. So long story short, it was Tbilisi, Georgia, not America, Georgia, yeehaw, that we were going to.
And what were you doing there?
So I was just presenting. I was doing social media presenting. So Ireland had a representative in the competition. So we were over there to support her, but then also get content with the other contestants who were from every corner of the world. We'd be telling them, of course, because we're an Irish language broadcaster, we try to avoid, the English as much as possible. Some of these poor contestants, they had really been practicing their English, their few lines of English to say up on stage. And then we were like, that's great. But how about we flip it to Irish? Well done, but we kind of need something else.
Yeah.
So we were getting all these children, I was going to say poor children, I'm sure they loved it and they had a great time, to speak bits of Irish to us. And they had no problem. There was no kind of, what is this? Or why would I be doing this? Because obviously we approached them and spoke to them in English first. But then we were like, no, we're just going to try this. And they absolutely loved it. They jumped in head first. And I was in Tbilisi, Georgia, speaking fluent Irish with my fluent Irish speaking co-workers. And it was just one of the moments where I was like, okay, for everyone who said this career path was going to limit me, look at me now. But yeah, it's absolutely nuts. And, there's so many examples. We've an absolutely just amazing presenter here, Hector, and his whole thing on Teach Gahar on the channel is travel shows. And he has been to every corner of the world. And I think because he's an Irish speaker, it's given him this really beautiful, space and opportunity to connect with other cultures and minority languages.
Yeah.
And it's just this, I think, skill of understanding we have. Understanding what's not said in a conversation and just being able to connect with people. I think when you do come from a minority language background, you're just quite patient and understanding. And I think that's why, being Irish and therefore speaking Irish has taken both me and so many other people far further than we could have ever fathomed.
Oh, I think that's fabulous. And I think you're right, because for a lot of English speakers, we never have that perspective of being a minority language and everyone around us will speak English to us. But when you've been able to flip that, then that's quite a different experience.
Exactly, because I think when you speak a minority language, it's something either you yourself have fought for or your ancestors before you have fought for. And there's this understanding and kind of pride that, okay, this hasn't been easy. We've had to fight for this. There has been struggles and difficult times involved. But look at us now, and we can all sit around a table and have a chat and, have a laugh. And it's just a story of kind of triumph. And I think because that triumph is so integral to the story of Ireland, and I think our DNA now, that's a kind of point of appreciation that a lot of people have for us. They're like, wow, look at them go. Who are these little underdogs? Where did they come from? And look at them now. And we're like, yes, here we are.
I love that. Are there, a while ago I had a Welsh speaking guest who had been travelling around the world to all these little pockets of Welsh speakers in other countries, like in Argentina and God knows which amazed me. So is it the same with Irish speakers?
Absolutely. Like you'll find Irish speakers in general everywhere. The diaspora have taken the language with them far afield. But also I think when Irish people move abroad, suddenly they're like, oh no, I'm actually really proud of this. They might have hated Irish in school. But then suddenly if someone abroad asks them about the Irish language, they're like, yeah, this is my native language. I'm so proud of her. I've spoken her since I was 4 years of age. And it's like, where was that energy when you were at home? But again, it's just that sense of connecting to what feels homely and what feels familiar. But apart from there just being Irish speakers kind of littered everywhere, there are pockets of what we call Gaeltacht areas. Gaeltacht areas are areas where Irish is the predominantly spoken language of communication. I believe there's one in Chile, so similar to the Welsh speakers in Argentina, whatever happened there. And then also there's a pocket of it in Canada, which is really, really interesting. But yeah, and then you have the likes of Newfoundland in the States, where I don't think necessarily Irish is spoken. But have you ever listened to an interview? It was blowing up on my For You page not too long ago. Like, if you listen to them, you would swear you had just pulled them from the depths of the west of Ireland. The accent they have, like, they kind of put me to shame. Their Irish accent is a lot better than mine. It's just crazy. Like, people really lock into their Irishness. They're like, I'm not letting this go. And whatever they can cling to, it's like just the death grip, and they won't let it go. But yeah, we have sowed our seeds everywhere, and long may it last as far as I'm concerned.
I found this fascinating to hear. My main experience of the Irish language before I spoke to Laura was a trip to stay with friends on the island of Inishmaan in the Aran Islands some years ago. It was, well, it probably still is a place where the Irish language is like a really important part of the culture. As I recall, there was even a high school on the island where mainland Irish students could come to be educated in Irish. So I still remember a couple of words. I won't butcher them though by trying to pronounce them. My final guest today is Alda Sigmundsdottir, an Icelandic writer who you also met back in the Iceland Chats with Locals episode. So Alda learnt a whole lot about the Icelandic history and culture when she started looking more deeply into her own family history and heritage. Much of that is going into her next book, which is nearly finished, I believe, and I asked her to start off by telling me how she came to write this book, The Shape of Silence.
I grew up outside of Iceland, and I didn't really have that much of a sense of Icelandic history until I actually went back to university in my late 40s and started studying folkloristics and ethnology. Part of that was the study of the working class system in Iceland. What we hear about the most, or what I had heard about the most, were these sort of very heroic stories of the Vikings, the sagas, our contribution to world literature, the fact that we had survived through centuries in this incredibly harsh country, harsh climate, very volatile nature where natural disasters came regularly and maybe killed off half the population, and then we would rise up again and so on. What I didn't know was the systemic oppression that was prevalent here for many, many centuries. I knew Iceland was a colony, of course. I mean, Iceland was a colony, first of Norway and then of Denmark for about 6 or 7 centuries. And we didn't become an independent republic until 1944. And since 1944, there's been an explosive growth of prosperity. I mean, at the 100 years ago, we were the poorest country in Europe.
I didn't know that. Wow.
People were living in turf houses well into the 20th century. All of this has happened in a relatively short period of time. And I was shocked to learn this, and also to realize that I knew very little about my own personal history, especially my maternal lineage. The stories, for example, of my great-grandmother and my grandmother had been very little talked about. So what I am doing in this book, it's literary nonfiction, and it sort of switches between memoir and history. I'm examining both my personal lineage, or my maternal lineage, back about 3 generations. So my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, within the context of these structures that made up Icelandic society at the time. I can just give you an example. My great-grandmother lost her husband when she was 28. She had 4 children. This was a very common occurrence, of course. He had gone out fishing and he drowned. This happened routinely in Iceland, that people went out fishing. You can imagine, with the conditions, the storms that we get today, when we have all the tools at our disposal to predict the weather and so on, and they didn't have any of that. They'd go out open rowboats, So he drowned. And what was routine at this time was that the household was then automatically dissolved. The children were sent into foster care. and the surviving parent was sent to become a laborer or became a laborer on some other farm. So they would lose their children.
And it's not that long ago then. So this was your great-grandmother's generations.
Beginning of the 20th century. So this is in 1906. So my grandmother is raised, so she is at the age of 4 taken from her family. She loses touch with her siblings, her mother, and is sent into foster care, where unfortunately she was not treated very well. And that was also very common at this time. They held these so-called pauper auctions so that these children who were from impoverished families or families like my great-grandmother where the breadwinner had died. And by the way, no one asked whether she could continue farming with support. It was just instant. The district came in, they auctioned off all of her belongings, literally all of her belongings. Someone came the evening before the auction was to take place and advised her to hide her duvet because they would take that as well. The proceeds from that auction were then used to pay for the upkeep of her children who were sent away from her. And the district would send the children to whoever was willing to take them for the least amount of money. So they were auctioned off to the lowest bidder, basically. And, most of these people did not do this out of the goodness of their hearts. They wanted cheap or free labor. So they wanted someone who could work. So my great-grandmother got to choose one child to keep with her. The youngest child was 1, just a baby. And, when I started hearing about this story, I wondered, why wouldn't she choose the youngest child? Because, arguably the youngest child would be the one who needed her the most. She chose the oldest, who was 5. Of course, it makes sense when I, delve deeper into it because as a laborer, so she had to go out and find work at farms in the area or nearby farms. And no one wanted to take in a laborer who had a dependent child with them. But they were willing to take in a laborer who had a child who could work.
At 5.
At 5 years old, chose the child who could work. This is just a very small part of this history, and it gives you an idea of how the society was set up and how these systems were so hostile to humans and human development and human emotion. I look at them in this book as trauma-generating systems. I mean, people didn't know about trauma the way we know about trauma today, of course. But all of this was, of course, extremely traumatic. And the way people survived was, of course, by deadening their feelings. And there's a metaphor that I return to in the book a few times, and which is that of a glass wall. And that is sort of how I experienced both my mother and my grandmother, is as if they were behind a glass wall and I could see them, I could hear them, I could sense them there, but I couldn't reach them. And this is because of the emotional dissociation that took place. And of course, this gets passed on down through the generations, through behavior, through the body, through, all these ways that we relate to one another as people. So this is what I've been looking at in the last couple of years, and that has absolutely fascinated me when I start plugging my family into what I now know about Icelandic history and Icelandic systems. And the other thing is that there is so much silence around this. It is not talked about in Icelandic society. There's no reckoning with this. And what I'm saying here is just a small part of the whole picture. My family is absolutely not unique. There are thousands of Icelandic families who have a very similar story, whose ancestors were what we call in Iceland niðursetningar, which is these dependents on the district that my grandmother was, where the children were taken away, or if people were elderly and couldn't work or disabled or something, they were taken and placed at farms or auctioned out to farms in this way. They were, of course, the lowest of the low, but the structure was set up in such a way that 5% of the population had power, 95% of the population had virtually no power, no recourse, no legal means to reckon with the system.
This part of my conversation with Alda was really just the tip of the iceberg, but it was really fascinating to hear some of the cultural background to parts of Icelandic life that still impacts things today, and more of that in her book, The Shape of Silence, coming soon. So, thank you so much for listening to episode 395 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. A shout out to my fabulous guests. I chatted first with Silvia of the Good Observer blog. More about Silvia and her writing at thegoodobserverblog.co.uk. And I'll leave a link in the show notes to a special 7-day slow travel itinerary for Bali, which she put together for us, knowing exactly what thoughtful travellers like. After that, I chatted with Laura Pakenham. You can see more about Laura on her Instagram, so instagram.com/Laura J. Pakenham. And I will also leave a link to Laura's new book, Irish, History and Culture Through Language. And lastly, I chatted with Alda Sigmundsdottir, more about Alda and her work at aldasigmunds.com, and I will leave a link to all of Alda's cool books about Iceland, which will, of course, soon include The Shape of Silence. If you have your own cultural deep dives to share, come and do that in either the Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers on those platforms. And remember to sign up for the newsletter at thoughtfultravel.substack.com. All of this stuff and more in the show notes. And for this episode, you can find them at notaballerina.com/395. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.